Well, I think it's pretty important that we look at the crop agronomy based on the fact that our herbicides are failing in so many situations. Is that what led you to start looking at the crop competition, row spacing, seeding rate again?
Obviously, yeah, so herbicide resistance, can't just keep tackling it with herbicides, so we need non-herbicide tools. Back in the 80s when hoegrass came out, we didn't need good crop competition or good crop agronomy. We could just spray the weeds with hoegrass and they would die. Now things like crop agronomy are very important, so that's why we're looking into it, because our herbicides are failing us.
The real old work looks at basically a square, 3 inch by 3 inch seems to be the best. How tight are you going with your work, and where's a good balance for the grower?
Yeah, in terms of wheat plant spacing, yeah, the closer the better is ideal, isn't it? But we've got to be practical. So we basically say that we need to go for the narrowest row spacing that is practical. And so what's happened is there's new equipment that can achieve a much narrower row spacing than the equipment of a decade ago. Probably for two main reasons. The harvesters can cut very low and cut the straw very short, and also the seeding gear, the seeding bars can handle a lot more stubble than the older ones can. So we can actually achieve a narrower row spacing than we used to be able to.
So your work, you did, what spacings did you look at with yours?
Well, I just had one trial, and that was 15, 22 and 30 centimetre row spacing. But the bit of work that I referred to was a review from Charles Sturt Uni, headed up by Brendan Scott, and they reviewed 89 wheat row spacing trials from around Australia. And really the summary is that they found 1% yield benefit per inch. So for every inch that you go wider beyond 7-inch row spacing, you lose 1% of yield.
Back when no-till really started in the mid to late 90s, there was a lot of concern about row spacing, throw of herbicides, particularly trifluralin, and crop safety.
Yeah.
How do you see the narrower row spacing interacting with those herbicides?
Yeah, we've got to get it right for every bar, and yeah, there has been a move to wider rows so we can go to higher trifluralin rates, but there's a lot of guys with 7-inch row spacing with a certain sort of seeding boot and tine setup that are achieving the high trifluralin rates at 7 inches and high seeding speeds as well. So it's possible, we've just got to get the gear right.
Will this competition enable, I guess, some of the lower performing herbicides, such as potentially triolate, which in its own right is not a bad ryegrass controller, but will this allow some of those products to come back in vogue, do you think?
We're probably speculating a little bit there, but what you're getting at, I think, is that herbicide plus competition equals a good result, and so perhaps a herbicide that is not a 90%er, maybe a 60 or 70%er, maybe we can bring that up to 80 with really good competition. There's a bit of an assumption there, but there is a bit of work to show that up. Probably the best example of that is in Canada with their Liberty Link canola. The way that Liberty's not a fantastic herbicide on its own, but you put a big competitive canola crop around it and you can make it work.
The costs of doing this, obviously there's more tines, there's a bit more horsepower. How do you see the costs?
Yeah, well, the cost analysis I talked about was assuming the farmer had enough horsepower, but there is a cost. Farmers often want to avoid going to a narrow row spacing because the seeding bar costs more. When you amortise that over a few years of the bar, over a few thousand hectares, that cost is only $1 to $2 a hectare really for the cost of the bar. But we do have a higher fuel cost for pulling more tines through the ground, and also perhaps a slight time of sowing delay because we might have to slow down by 0.5 to 1 kilometre per hour for the narrower row spacing. So there is a cost, and that cost comes out, my analysis, around about, between $3 and $10 a hectare. $10 a hectare was the cost to go from 12-inch row spacing to 7-inch.
So your work was done with ryegrass. Assumptions on other weeds, radish obviously is a big problem.
Yeah, well, definitely. So I haven't seen a lot of row spacing data on wild radish, but a couple of years ago I had a wild radish competition trial. The higher seeding rates definitely suppress the wild radish biomass in a big way. So, yep, it works for all weeds, but I don't have lots of data on all of them.
And any thoughts on one of the big issues with broadleaf weed control or any post-stem control is potentially canopy cover and getting particularly contact herbicides onto the weeds.
Yeah, that was
something. Is there enough space to still achieve that on a 6-inch row?
That was something that was discussed in question time. With the wild radish sprays in Western Australia, all of our work is shown we've got to get in earlier, so we're getting in with that first spray at 2 leaf. When your wheat crop is 2 leaf, your your spray coverage is no problem because obviously you've only got 2-leaf crop around it, and then we're trying to get back for that second spray at early tillering. Obviously a narrow row spacing, you're going to get that canopy closure sooner, so you probably do need to be in earlier than you are traditionally doing your radish spray, but we need to obviously keep up those water rates and keep that spraying speed down.
With an increase in biomass for crop coverage, does that translate to an increase in biomass at harvest time and consequently more work for the header, or it only translates in the early stage?
That's a good question. I don't have lots of numbers on it. I could only say that the narrow row spacings are giving us a slightly higher yield, and what we know of the harvest index of wheat is that probably means that if we're getting a higher yield, we are getting a higher biomass. So yes, it does mean more work for the header if we are increasing our yields, but increasing yields is what the game is all about, so I don't see that as a big problem.
As well as the tighter row spacing and seeding rate, there's a push towards an east-west seeding direction, if feasible. These two would obviously link pretty well.
Yeah, where it's practical. Catherine Borger from Department of Agriculture and Food did 6 trials. She found that she could halve the ryegrass seed set by sowing east-west compared to sowing north-south. So that's really just by sowing east-west, with the winter sun in Australia being low in the sky in winter, there's more shading of the weeds in it when you sow in an east-west direction. So that's something that's free. That's free weed control. You can halve your ryegrass seed set for free by just sowing east-west. Obviously not practical in all paddocks, but if you've got a paddock that perhaps is a square paddock and you can choose the direction, choosing east-west will be a good thing for weeds.
And any yield response either up or down on an east-west sowing, or basically pretty neutral?
Yeah, Catherine's trials, 6 trials, showed that in 5 of them she got a higher yield where she sowed east-west in the presence of weeds. Obviously the crop was suppressing the weeds more and that was allowing it to yield more. In the absence of weeds, I don't think there's a great deal of difference.
So in summary, east-west sowing, tighter row spacing, and we're using agronomy tools to help the chemicals.
Exactly. Good cultural practices, more crop, less weeds.